I've come to believe in this idea of balance as rooted in resilience, which I think is also something that you and I both value a lot, like sort of philosophically, where it's like, I think the reality is that life brings different things to either side of the seesaw constantly. And balance is really about like knowing where your center is and how to get there, no matter where you are on that seesaw. I'm Cadence. This is Busybody Podcast, and today I'm here with Christina Chaey. I'm super excited to kind of co-host this conversation today with Christina because we are collaborating on the Nourish Yourself program, which is rolling out this winter spring to support everyone. Christina, introduce yourself. Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Christina Chaey. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a recipe developer, a writer, soon to be first time cookbook author. I have my first cookbook coming out in early 2026. And I write a newsletter on Substack called Gentle Foods, where I write essays and contribute recipes really around a very aligned topic of, kind of nourishing yourself, just meditations on, I think, like finding peace with cooking and, just finding like ritual and practice in that process.
So that's exactly one of the reasons why I reached out to you to do this program together, because your focus is very much in this space of accessible eating that's still delicious, exciting, interesting, not rote, and also makes space for like mistakes or jazzing up something from your pantry. Like there's a lot of options. It feels very like scalable. I really like cooking and I like eating, but looking at your recipes, I'm like, oh, I could literally take it to this next level. Or I can imagine someone who really is like, I've never really cooked something more complicated than like stir fry. You also have options, and you're very like clear about that in your Substack. Like, try this breakfast thing. It's like 3 ingredients and I've been eating it all week. And I feel like somebody who's like kind of looking at you aspirationally would be like, okay, maybe I can try that, and then, see your photos from like the big holiday meals and stuff that you make that are really like, okay, I can see why she worked up Bon Appetit. And, understand that there's a scale to go to, but it doesn't feel at all like, oh my God, I could never. And I just follow her to be wowed all the time. So I wanted to bring that in because I really felt and feel like food appreciation and kind of food awareness, food knowledge is such an important aspect of developing peace around food and knowledge in general. That's such a part of my brand, like how your body works, understanding why things happen, understanding what pain is, understanding what cellulite is, like understanding these things so that they aren't haunting us or kind of like hanging over us in some way. So that's a really important aspect of the program, is that you really bring this like, you can do it. Here's just ways to like make hummus not be the most boring thing for you, or like we literally do a live cooking class with you, which, I think everyone experiences like, oh, I'm doing it. It's happening. Like I just made a meal that's going to last me several days, and it wasn't the scariest thing I ever did.
Right, totally.
So we did an AMA that you beautifully articulated on your stories. We wanted to answer some questions today that are very much in line with what we talk about in the course. And the people that ask those questions, like, those are our peeps. These are who we hope are going to enjoy.
Yeah.
Talk us through what you put out there.
Yeah, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Nourish is something where I feel like I never took that course with you when you were running it. I think maybe a year before we started working on it together, but I wanted to. I was very intrigued by it. And, even as someone who works in this industry, who has worked in food and worked in food media and restaurants and whatever for the last decade plus of my life, it's just funny because I'll read a description of the Nourish course on your website, and I'll be like, I need that. And all to say, like, the things that we're talking about today, the questions that we're examining and hopefully trying to shed some light on, one, I feel like I want to emphasize to people, like, these are not the right answers. We're not coming with right answers. We're not coming with like definitive science or whatever. Like, that's not what I do. I feel like what I try to do is examine sort of like the emotional and the stuff that we kind of hold on to that's like behind the questions. It's like, okay, like, what are the things that we're really like feeling that are driving some of these anxieties and fears and guilt, and how do we like look at these things with a bit more compassion? And I feel like that's something that you share as well. So
I think another way to say we're not giving like the right answers is that really the way that I teach and coach people is what is called in the industry client-led, meaning my role is to be like a shepherd, a guide. I really believe people have the answers in them. I think we are all like beautiful, sentient beings, and really we kind of know, we're like plants growing towards the light. Like, we kind of know where we want to be. Often we don't have the resources, which could literally be knowledge, straight knowledge. So that's literally what's in our course, like the 3 workshops that people get. One is just like, what is carbohydrates, protein, fat? Like, what are they doing? How do we digest them? Like, just so that, like, did you ever sit down and really look those up and learn about how they break down in your body? Or have you just been reading like pop diet information from various magazines and being like, carbs, fat, protein, good? Like, if you don't really understand how these work, you're always going to be just at the mercy of the next kind of fad or headline or whatever. And also, it could just be someone creating space, which I think is what a big part we're doing, like a container to help you have insight. So even like a yoga class is basically a space for people to breathe, be self-reflective, go internal, be restful. They might not be able to provide that for themselves regularly.
Totally.
But they're like, oh, I love this class that I take every Saturday morning. Who cares what the moves are? What it is like this calm space with like the lights are dimmed and there's nice music, and maybe that's like really the value of that. So I also really always, and I think this is also a place that our values align, I am always steering people away from anyone who's like, this is the right way and that is the wrong way. Like, that is a huge red flag immediately, because there is a way that works for every single human, and there are like general rules of non-self-harm and things like that. Don't poison, but no, one person's like ideal way of eating can be completely not workable for another person based on all kinds of things. So that is literally why the diet industry exists, because it's complicated. If it was simple, that whole world wouldn't work.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say is that we are only human. We too are people and consumers of media and just like crap in the world. And yesterday, as I was doing some prep for this episode, I totally got by one of those sponsored ads that are popping up all over my Instagram that are like, this is the way that you're going to eat right and everything's going to change and your skin's going to clear up and you're going to lose 20 pounds and you're going to blah, blah, blah. And then it'll be over for all of you, but I totally got. It was an ad from some kind of low FODMAP specific food delivery service. But the ad was like, it was aesthetically attractive. It was showing all these yummy foods. It was talking about, how the service makes it easy to go through all the steps of what it means to follow a low FODMAP diet, which for anyone who doesn't know is just, it's a certain kind of diet that's often prescribed by doctors that involves specific phases of eliminating like a ton of foods and then reintroducing them slowly and totally. And I was just like, wow, this sounds great. I love this. I need this. And then I was like, but I don't. I was like, before the second I was watching this ad where it was like,
talking about these specific phases and how this service was going to help me like achieve all of them, this thought has never crossed my mind before as something I might want or need in my life. But the temptation to just have like an easy answer, or I think the right answer, all these things we just talked about is super real. And it continues to be, something I navigate in my own life, which is why I appreciated that so many of the questions that we got from people really followed a few kind of major themes. Like, so number one, thank you to everyone for sending these amazing questions. We got, dozens. And I think some of the major themes that I noticed in these questions were, a real concern around this quote unquote right way to eat. A lot of stuff around restriction and moderation and finding balance, which I have a lot of thoughts about, and I'm sure you do too. Ingredient specific fear mongering. So I would say that's anything related to fears around sugar or carbs or seed oils or like whatever it is. This messaging around evil foods. Yeah. And then I think another huge one was just like handling when other people around you are engaging in this sort of harmful talk around dieting and, just other kind of toxic mentalities around food and bodies.
Well, a bunch of the questions also were with like domestic partners, which is super challenging.
Okay, so I have a question for you, which is like, do you have a question that you feel like immediately struck you as like, oh my God, great question?
I have a few. They were all so good.
They were great.
So I think there's kind of a theme. There's like sort of a few questions that get mixed into one, which is all this kind of like how to frame healthy eating without that turning into restriction, how to eat well and balanced without giving up things that you like, how do I be healthy without over analyzing everything that I'm eating. These are all in this same kind of like Venn diagram of eating without freaking out, which I think is very much what we try to address in the Nourish program, because I think that there's a billion people out there, mainly women and femme socialized people, who probably had much more extreme disordered eating when they were younger, have kind of healed that to a point. They're not doing the more extreme behaviors that they did, in their teens or their 20s. But now they're kind of in this nowhere zone, this like ether where they're like, okay, I know what I shouldn't do anymore. I'm not micromanaging my meals like crazy, or I'm not like starving or binging or doing these like more intense things, but I still have like enormous anxiety, and now it's just kind of floating around constantly. And it's almost like I'm doing a impression of somebody who like eats well and balanced, but I don't really know what that is. I don't know if that's resonating in my body, and it makes one really vulnerable to like those kinds of Instagram ads, because of course you want someone to go, this is the way, or stop eating this, all seed oils are killing you, your coffee is rotten, like all these. We've heard that one, how the coffee beans are all rancid.
I don't want to hear it. I have. I just willfully tune it out.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that person, like, that is this person who's like educated and food aware enough that they're not living on completely like super high processed food, but they are literally worrying, should I not be eating seed oils, or is every time I eat a pastry or some salami, pepperoni, something that's like processed in that way, is that horrible? And then I think with that comes a lot of restriction in ways that are maybe more subtle, but that's just the anxiety piece. Like a lot of just like, I never have sugar, or I never have dessert, or like I don't keep XYZ in my house. It's not a really joyful, free place, even if from the outside that person looks like, oh, they're eating a sandwich, they had avocado toast for breakfast. Like, what are you talking about? They seem fine.
Yeah. As I was listening to you talk, I was reminded of something I've been working on a lot this year, which is just this idea of positive visions. I think what you were saying was basically like, if you're coming from this place of what not to do, it leaves, if that's one column, this other column of what to do is like not self-directed. It's not self-informed. It's not something that you're actively pursuing. All you're doing is pursuing something that you don't want to do. And so it totally makes sense that it then leaves this like morass of just like, well, what do I do? And then it is this perfect funnel for all kinds of information and misinformation to like come through. And at that point, it's just like, no wonder everyone is confused about everything all the time. Like, I actively feel like someone who is like counts myself as part of that demographic often. And this is my profession, which sometimes I forget. It's like, that means I know more than the average person about a lot of this stuff. And yet here I am still feeling confused about plenty of things. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm curious to know like what conversations look like just with clients of yours and people that you work with around this idea of like, well, how do I do it? How do I do it right? And how do you go about shifting that to, well, maybe it's not how do I do it right in an objective, singular way, but how do I make it right for me?
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of what we address in the program. And when I work with people one-to-one, one thing that I ask is that they keep a food diary, which is different than like calorie counting. I'm not asking for portion sizes or like how many grams of XYZ. Really, I just want to see a picture of their day, because literally a picture of what you're eating says a lot. Like if you're getting up at 4 a.m. because you have a long commute and your first meal of the day is at like 5:30 in the morning, like that's going to be a very different picture throughout a day. That's a super long day. If you get home at like 7 o'clock at night, you're going to bed at 9 or whatever, versus someone who gets up at 10:30 in the morning and their first meal of the day is at 11:30. Like I literally look at everyone's journals, and then we just start talking about like, what is your lifestyle? Like, what makes the most sense for you? Do you cook? Do you have time to cook? Do you like, where do you get your food? Do you like to do that? This is how we start to like remove the barriers. Like, if you really find it hard to find time to shop, can we prepare your pantry and your shopping list for when you do shop to really set you up so that you don't have to shop very much and you still have a lot of options that are like nourishing and balanced for you at home, and just literally start to create those creatively together. Like, what are snacks that you can have on hand? Like, what does a solid day look like for you? And hopefully with the self-awareness that we build in the program, people can also notice like, oh, I actually felt really good when we made XYZ plans, or that didn't work for me. I got like really tired, or like my digestion was off, like blah, blah, blah. Great. Let's keep, tweaking that to make it work for people.
Yeah.
I think that's why like, dieting and various prescribed programs just don't work, because it's literally just like putting something on top of someone. And like, if you've got kids or you're up really late or like whatever, like if suddenly your little meal plan just doesn't work anymore because it doesn't allow for variation, and that's why everyone quits eventually. I mean, one of the many reasons.
Yeah. And this is where I feel like it can be so helpful to really challenge certain binaries and certain assumptions that we hold about food specifically. Like, I noticed there were a couple questions that people asked or comments that people made about snacking, right? And there's such a demonic kind of reputation that snacking has, where it's the enemy. Snacking is my weakness, like it's garbage, whatever. But to me, and I think something that we emphasize a lot in this course and in our own philosophies, is like the context of it really matters, where if a snack at a certain time of day is going to be the difference between you feeling like you're going to crash and, like binge at night and end up feeling horrible, like right before you go to bed, or whatever the scenario may be, then like that is something that I would advocate for you to eat that snack. And then I think from there, it becomes a question of just like, I think it's about a willingness to engage with what you're actually sort of feeling and how you mentally and physically are actually processing and digesting, in the purest sense of the word, like the input. With binaries, I think, like another one that comes to mind is this idea of processed food is bad. or fast food is bad or whatever. I was thinking about this person who was in our course like a little while back, who I think she spent a lot of her day in her car for work, right? Like that was just the reality of her life and her lifestyle. And like that is a case where it's like, okay, like you know that your lifestyle that requires you to get up in the morning and be in a car for like an hour or 2 hours or something first thing in the morning, like, that is not the person who is going to wake up tomorrow and be like, I'm gonna make like a 2 hour trad wife style like home breakfast for myself every morning before I get into my car. You know, like that's not going to be the right thing for that person. However, something that might be right for that person is, like, as you said, some education around what kinds of options might make them feel better during that car ride. Maybe it's about just like grabbing the egg wrap at, you know, like your drive-through in the morning and like getting that combo of protein and carbs and etc. will end up making you sort of feel better throughout the day than a different choice. And those are the kinds of things that I feel like it can be really hard to know how to ask those questions if you don't know that those are the questions.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. And I think there's also an assumption that to change, it has to be somewhat like really drastic. I think that's very much like what kind of marketing and doing this around the New Year's, we're doing this intentionally because this is the time that there's just so much of like basically make a drastic change. The one that you fell down, it was like all your problems are solved like forever. Like there are these really big promises. And it could be these baby steps of what if you make a better choice at the drive-through? Start to notice how that feels. Maybe that turns into, oh my God, I can pre-make little egg McMuffin things at home actually. And now I've just reduced like the salt and the grease and the this and the that. But like, let me get there slowly in my own time instead of taking that person and expecting them to make homemade granola every morning and like, you know, source a zillion beautiful nuts and grains and all this stuff. Like that's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I think too, like just being careful to like unsubscribe from the higher, like the, I'm not sure how to call it, maybe like the hierarchy of health where it's like, you know, homemade granola is great. Homemade egg muffins are great. Like I am not really interested in telling someone like that is a better choice for their life. Because it might not be, you know, and that's where I think it's so interesting to talk about other ways that we define health for ourselves, other ways that we define balance, where so often these things can look so explicitly like it's only about, you know, how many grams of carbohydrates you're eating in a day, or only about how much unprocessed food you're eating, or whatever it may be, and it can feel like super rigid. And in fact, like there are other determinants that I prioritize in my life, or other things that I value. Like, you know, maybe I'm someone who like the time I choose to spend not making homemade whatever is time that I would rather spend like taking a 20-minute walk. Do you know what I mean?
It always makes me think of when I talk about this kind of like what is health, you know, how much attention do we want or need to put into these aspects of our lives, specifically food and movement and those kinds of like health and wellness categories. I think of a couple clients that I have and have had in the past who are doctors, like surgeons, emergency room doctors, and a client I had a long time ago who was in some kind of like creative, like, I don't even know what he did. He worked for a big media company and would put out these like really huge products of some kind, big creative projects. So things happening in space. I think it's the kind of company that like Google would hire to do a big event for them or something.
Got it.
And all these people loved their jobs. Love their jobs. Huge amount of satisfaction, creativity, meaning. The surgeon in particular I'm thinking about, she would tell me she would do 8-hour surgeries on a moment's notice. Like that's being an emergency room surgeon. Someone comes in with like multiple gunshots. You go from chatting in the hallway with your colleague to 8 hours straight on your feet, full focus. You're not being like, guys, I have to stop every 3 hours for a snack. Like, they don't get a pee break. I don't know how they do it. But I mean, I would ask her, I was like, how do you, like, what does that feel like? And she was like, you're just so, like, this is how there's different people in the world. For her and the way her brain works, she's like, you're so focused. Like, I don't have any thoughts about, like, that I have to pee, that I'm hungry. She's like, once I finish, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so hungry. Like, all this stuff, but yeah, like, doesn't cross her mind. She's just like completely immersed. And,
Wow.
similarly, this person who did the creative media stuff, he had crazy long hours. Like, he just worked like insane hours. It was 100% taking a toll on his body. He knew it. He was always like straining and spraining things. He was eating all over crazy, no consistency of any kind. But he was really honest that he was like, I love my job. I love my life. Like, I'm not willing to change what I'm doing right now. Maybe later he would, but he was just like, this is what I worked my whole life for. And I'm not going to he would get up at 6 to like immediately start working at home, take a shower, grab a quick snack, get on the subway, be at work. Like, he's not fitting in a 20-minute stretch session there,
Totally.
And I'm like, I respect that dude. Is that the body that I want to live in? No. But like, he is super fulfilled in a different way. And I value that. Like, I'm not seeing a sad person who's feeling lost and confused and uncomfortable. He's like, this is the life I've always wanted. And similarly, like with people in the medical field, a lot of times the environment dictates how they can take care of themselves. And that's just like a cost benefit analysis. And to expect that person to like drink a green juice in the middle of their 24-hour shift is just like that's just illogical, basically.
Yeah. And that really brings up a lot of thoughts for me around like how my conception of balance as it pertains to food just continues to evolve as I get older. I think like where I am today, I would say feels much more like balance doesn't mean that you're perfectly balanced in the middle of the seesaw and like neither here nor there is teeter-tottering to one side at all times. I think it's much more like I've come to believe in this idea of balance as rooted in resilience, which I think is also something that you and I both value a lot, like sort of philosophically, where it's like, I think the reality is that life brings different things to either side of the seesaw constantly. And balance is really about like knowing where your center is and how to get there, no matter where you are on that seesaw, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I write about a lot in my Substack, that we can't aim for sameness. Like, sameness doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Sameness is the perfectionist idea that I'm always going to approach every day, every meal, every problem, every setback with this like perfect solution or this like relaxed, optimistic, knowing way. But consistency, resilience is kind of the 2 steps forwards, 1 step back thing. When I was in my 20s, I used to run myself ragged, not eat enough, not because I was having disordered eating, but I was just a dumb 20-year-old who was just like not bringing snacks and like, being like, whatever, like so all over the place. And I would get crazy hungry, eat too much, in that I like felt ill or like it's just not nourishing, regularly felt
like it was too much for you, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. And regularly kind of felt like I was going to faint or like shaky, it did not feel good.
Right.
I have developed enough knowledge, skill, self-reliance, kind of connection, confidence with my body, other resources, just like better planning ahead, joining the co-op, things that give me resources for like literally having better snacks around, that even when I still run myself ragged, I don't drop all the way back to that way of handling things. I might still get to a point where I'm like, oh my God, I'm so hungry. But I'm not so hungry that I'm like eating an entire pizza on my own or just like cleaning out my whole fridge. I'm so hungry, like, oh my God, I'm so hungry, I'm going to eat my meal now,
Right.
And I think like that's a place, that's a promise, that I want to give people. It's like, I can give you the skills that you can lift out of kind of where you're feeling now. So you just have like a little more resilience to fall back on, because you will get sick, interrupted, overstressed, overworked, go on vacation, have in-laws in your house for too long, all the things that do make it almost impossible to be like, I'm having my yogurt and chia seed.
Like, you could choose to not do those things, I suppose, but really, like, the consequence is that your world just becomes smaller and smaller. Like,
Yeah.
that's not the life I'm trying to live personally. And I think it took me, like, I continue to be on this journey, but it's taken me quite a long time to get to the place where I am now, where, I was just thinking about growing up with women's magazines in like the 2000s when I was like a teenager, and how balance with food, like for me, my conception of balance with food is really rooted in some of that, just that like crap I was consuming during those years, where balance was like an always variety packed 1200 calorie daily input that ends with a square of dark chocolate, and it's like, well, I don't want a square of dark chocolate all the time. Like, does that mean I'm doing it wrong? Like, it's just so funny to think about how much that defined like these long-term ideas I have held around what it looks like to be balanced. And it's something that I find was really echoed in a lot of these questions that we got from people that were around, like staying healthy, quote unquote, but like with balance, quote unquote.
Yeah, exactly. That is something that I address in the workshop. Literally, one of the first questions I ask is like, what is healthy? What does that mean? What do we mean when we say that? And I just want to add, when you were like, we could avoid all those things, the social situations, the going out, the traveling, and then our life gets really small. And I would say what I think happens for people is, instead of avoiding those things, they just live in fear of them. They're excited for their trip to Cancun, and they're terrified that they're going to be like drinking and eating too much and all this stuff. They're super excited to go to Christmas and New Year's or whatever holiday they're celebrating. At the same time, they're like, oh, there's going to be all these cookies, there's going to be all this stuff. And there's this sense, which I have addressed in several kind of social media posts that I've done, this idea that like one thing, one event, one meal, one handful of cookies is like setting you down this dark path or undoing everything. And that's such a reductive way of thinking. And it is fed so much by like women's magazines, like that your guilty pleasure, your naughty treat, like all this kind of stuff. Really, what we're trying to build is a resilient engagement with our nourishment, with food, via appreciation, via just resourcing, with our knowledge, with our understanding and intuition with our bodies. Because like a cookie or a holiday meal or a 2-week vacation, it doesn't, literally how our bodies work, how our metabolism work, it really doesn't affect you the way that we think it does. And sure, you get bloated, maybe like, I mean, I went to Italy for like 10 days and I definitely came back and I was like, wow, 2 plates of pasta and a bottle of wine every day does make a difference.
Interesting.
But also, since I don't live in Italy, sadly, I didn't worry about it because I knew I was just going to come home and go back to my usual way of eating, which is a much, much sadder version in comparison to eating in Italy, basically.
Right.
But I want to give people that kind of just confidence, wisdom, that like you can go to a party and like go bananas if you want, and then you just go back to the way that you normally take care of yourself, and it just doesn't matter. And I want to really like relieve people of that anxiety and guilt. And a bigger question, which we like can't even address here, is like, if the like this holiday period is turning into some kind of spiral for you where you are really feeling that you're doing a lot of imbibing in a way that doesn't feel good, but is kind of this release, and now you kind of can't stop, and that's like a whole other thing to address, and that is probably more about like restricted behavior at other times and like shame and messaging that you're having. But just the general person who's like freaked out because their friend brought cookies over for them and left them at their house, and they're like, well, now I'm going to eat that whole plate of cookies. Yeah, you are. And then they'll be gone. And then there won't be another plate of cookies, and you'll just go back to your normal life. And it's just like, it's really okay.
Right. I mean, I think it's really about this idea of, and this is from a question that someone asked about, like, what helps you with food fear? Like, i.e., eating bad foods, bad things will happen if I eat X food, etc. I think so much of it is around just that boogeyman of that bad thing that's going to happen that remains undetermined, undefined, non-specific.
Exactly. It has power, when we don't really know what we're talking about. You're so much more susceptible to someone saying the nut oils are destroying your digestion. And you're like, I guess I don't really understand what digestion is actually.
Right.
Like if you were to be like, tell me what digestion means. What does that actually mean? What happens when we swallow a piece of food and how does it go? What happens? Where does it go? I don't think many people could really walk.
I don't know, but it's bad.
Yeah, exactly. But it's perilous at every stage.
Right. You're like, okay. Well, I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about this behemoth topic of handling other people's diet talk, because there were quite a few questions around that. I enjoyed one question was, when people around you talk dieting, do you dissociate, push back, or a secret third thing? I love a secret third thing joke. But, a lot of like how to deal with parents who are, like, passing on harmful diet culture rhetoric to kids, or, moms who have disordered eating who always want to talk about it, that kind of thing.
I think it's super hard because I notice when it happens around me, a lot of people say things, it's like so quick, and it's not the movies. I'm not someone who could just right away like fires off a zinger, I was out with...
You mean like in response?
Yeah, like
if you catch it.
Just have my little flashcard and be like, but in reality, I'm just like, oh my God, like that's where your headspace is right now? Like, I thought we were just having sushi together. Like, what? And I found recently we were out with a couple friends of ours that, as couple friends tend to go, we're not like super best friends, super intimate friends with them, right? And the woman in the group at some point was like, oh, I just like to... We went to dim sum, which I love to do. Mm-hmm. And she was like, I didn't realize that she'd never really experienced the whole experience. If people don't know what dim sum is, you like go to these cavernous restaurants in at least in New York. This is my experience. And they have carts that go around with all these amazing like dumplings and, whatever you want. The endless options, little cakes, little this and that. And there are little plates with like 2 to 4 to 6 little items on there. And the point
the pinnacle of small plates eating, truly.
Yeah, seriously, yeah. And the whole point is you go with a group of people and then like there's just so much food on the table and everyone's trying things and like it's super fun. It's just like such a fun experience. And she kind of was like slowing down and I was like, oh, I want to order another one of like the shrimp noodle things. Those are my favorite. And she was like, oh, I think I'm done. I really just like to eat, like taste different things or something. Like basically she was trying to say like she doesn't eat a lot. She just like bites things. Like, this is a nonsensical statement. And I didn't have a response. I think what I often do is model my own comfort, Well,
because like, what are you going to say to that?
Exactly. But I want to address this person's question in that sometimes people literally say, oh, I'm not going to eat that. I'm trying to be good, or I'm like cutting out XYZ. And that's easier to be like, oh, I don't really engage with food like that. Like, I don't really believe in that. Anyway, moving on. Or just be like, hope that works for you. Moving on, But I think a lot of times people say things in a more subtle way. Like, I just like to take bites, or like, some weird subtle thing that like is kind of it's a diet. It's a restrictive diety way of kind of shading what's happening. And I'm in those situations, I try to just be like, well, I like to eat until I'm done eating. That's what I like to do. So I'm going to order my shrimp noodles and I'm going to eat them. And I'm not going to make a big show of it. And I'm not going to go, oh, I ate so much. And I'm not going to go like, no dinner for me tonight. I'm literally just going to eat my damn food and move on and hope that you'll notice that seems like a more relaxed way of being.
Yeah. It's tricky. I don't really know. I'm trying to think about what I do. I feel like I want to think more about how to approach situations like this because, like, as it stands right now, often it's just, as you mentioned, it's so quick that I don't really have time to process what I'm hearing, much less a response. Also, I think it's kind of like it gets really tricky because of autonomy and, whatever. It's like this is your prerogative and this is your body and your experience, and who am I to
Client who has parents that are like really like bonkers with this stuff. They're always on diets and it's very, very hard for her to go visit them. I think when it's like something like that, where it's like an intimate relation, it's a parent, it's a partner, it's a super close friend that you see a lot, that you do things with. I think you can literally make a boundary and just say, hey, I'm glad, like, whatever, that's how you do stuff. I'm really not in that. Like, I think there's enough media around diet culture that most people understand that, like, some people are really against dieting. And you can just be like, I don't want to hear that kind of stuff. It's actually like, it's upsetting for me or it's stressful for me. Like, I think that's fair and still can respect, like, they can do what they want. And I think it's also okay to, like, internally judge and just be like, it just really doesn't work. Like, whatever they're doing is, like, not great. It's not positive. So, like, you don't have to, share space with it. You just don't. Like, it's not, we can all just be like, your mom that's, like, cutting out all dairy and wheat and, like, going on weird crash diets every 6 weeks. It's not good. So you don't have to kind of enable that by, like, letting them blabber on about it. You can just be like, Mom, is there someone else that you can share this with? Because I actually find it stressful and I'd rather if we talked about something else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I do think in certain relationships that can be a good strategy for sure.
Virginia Soul Smith had something in a episode that she had or something. I don't know if it's her quote or someone else, but I learned it off of her stuff. If someone literally, if you're like at a buffet and, like, someone, whoever it is like, oh, I'm being bad, or like whatever, that kind of thing, or like, we're all dieting tomorrow. Her response, which I have memorized so that I can throw it out if I ever am in that situation, is just to say, oh, it's too bad how diet culture makes us feel like we have to earn our food, or whatever the situation is. It's too bad diet culture makes us feel like certain foods are good or bad, because it really puts it on them. Like, we already agree, right? It's really too bad, right? Like, it forces them to, it will probably make them be quiet, basically.
I mean, that's clever. I like that a lot. I also think that it does a good job of framing it as, like, we are all on the same side of, like, being affected by this kind of systemic issue. Like, we might not hold the same beliefs or philosophies, but, like, we are both subject to the same messaging that is objectively harmful. And I think even people who engage in those behaviors often are aware, as we've kind of talked about in this episode already, that, like, this is not it. It's like, all you know is what you don't do.
Exactly. It's a little opening door of, like, there's a little empathy in there that, like, possibly could spark a conversation or not, but it might just give them a little something to think about too, if you care, to kind of leave them with that they might be like,
yeah. No, that's a good one. I'm gonna pocket that one.
Yeah,
my own life.
Want to write it on the back of my hand. I really liked this question. How do you figure out how to build a nutrition plan without a nutritionist?
Oh, yeah.
I love this question because, kind of to your point earlier about, like, the hierarchy of health, we tend to also outsource our health and, like, our judgment, like, positive judgment about what we need to, like, an authority figure,
Right. Like, you tell me what is good or bad for me.
Yeah, the doctor told me, like, I need to do this or that, so I guess I do. Like, whatever, we love when people tell us what we are, if we're wrong. Like, we just love all that. And similarly, I think there can be kind of, like, lore that the only way to be healthy is to have, like, a authority figure tell you what to do, which is also why the marketing works for, like, the one that you fell down. seemed really authoritative, right? It was like, I have all the answers, and you're like, great.
I'm like, great, I love answers.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I want to address that we are not nutritionists, and that's intentional. Like, I actually at one point considered getting a nutritional degree.
Same.
And then I realized that it was just really not, again, how I wanted to engage with food. I think that we have too much, like, over focus on grams of protein and how much carbohydrates and all these kinds of things. People are very worried about that, and it's kind of missing the forest for the trees. Really, if you can just, eat a variety of foods regularly, consistently, and eat regularly. Most people really need to eat more, which always like blows people's mind. Even if people consider themselves overweight, usually they're skipping a bunch of meals. There's just like a real lack of consistency. And if you look at any living animal, we both have pets. People have pets out there. Generally, you feed your pets like very consistently, and that keeps them healthy. It keeps their weight balanced. Like it's part of caring for them, right? You don't forget to feed them for a day or just feed them once and then like some little snacks of theirs and then be like, whatever, you'll have dinner tomorrow. Like, but we do that to ourselves, which blows my mind. Or I always tell people, if someone was like, could you babysit my 8-year-old? You wouldn't be like, sure, I'm going to feed them nothing but coffee until 1. Then we're going to get like a bag of chips. And then I'll make him a sandwich around 4. Then we'll eat some leftovers at 11:30 at night. And then a bottle of wine. So your friend would be like, I'm never speaking to you guys. You would be like, oh, I'm going to make them breakfast. And I'm going to ask them later if they need a snack. And I'm going to make sure they drink some water. And I'm going to like, but for ourselves, we're like, oh yeah, what I just said was totally fine. And I'm going to do that for 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think building a nutritious plan without a nutritionist is literally just like what we talked about in the beginning, examining what works for your lifestyle and figuring out, is there a need? Like, do you literally eat no fruits and vegetables? Well, those are really helpful. So let's try and get those in. But maybe you eat lots of fruits and vegetables. Like maybe you're overanalyzing your diet and it's really just like I've definitely had people in the course that I'm like, we had someone in the course who comes from like a cooking restaurant family. Oh my God, her meals were great. She was like variety, all the things, balance, blah, blah, blah. I had no problems with what she was eating. I was just like, this is great. You eat all kinds of stuff. You're getting everything you need.
She didn't, and more importantly, she didn't really have problems with what she was eating, right?
Exactly.
If this is the person you're thinking about, her predominant concern was, why don't I look the way that I think eating this way should make me look?
Exactly.
Which is a totally different, we're just not having the same conversation anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's huge. And that's the kind of thing that we could talk about. In the group, you get individual sessions with me. So that's like exactly what we would talk about in an individual session. I would go, actually, everything you eat looks great. Balanced, you're eating regularly, you're not starving in the middle of the day, like everything's great. What's the problem? Well, how come XYZ? And I'd be like, all right, let's talk about body types. Let's talk about other things, movement, like whatever. That might be what that person gets out of that course.
Yeah, and then
joining kettlebell classes and run club and like addressing that aspect of her life instead. Not intentionally to lose weight, but really just to connect to her body in a different way and develop like a different perspective about her body.
Yeah, we're really working them up to that incendiary, you'll just never be skinny viral video. Which, for those who don't know, I would love if you could just explain that one, because that's probably like the most incendiary thing that you've ever published.
I'm going to post it again in like towards the end of January because
it's the perfect time for it, really.
Yeah. It came actually, that story about the cookies that I used, that was like from a real client. And I had a conversation with this client who was like tortured about these cookies that her friend brought over. And she has the coolest life. She's like TV adjacent in LA. Her friend brought her to this amazing cooking show competition thing. And so they like brought home boxes from all these contestants.
Amazing.
And I was like, this sounds amazing. Like best weekend ever. And she was like, yeah, but now I have this box of cookies here. And I was like, please explain the problem. And then she was like, well, I'm going to eat them. And I was like, yeah. And so I made this reel, like almost just off of that conversation where I was just basically like, our perception of ourselves, like the less punchy version, is that our perception of ourselves that somehow we're supposed to dramatically look different from the way that we look today is, for 99% of us, just not true. You know, like, you're never going to be skinny. Very few people are skinny. This idea of skinny, like, for my body to be skinny, I would have to be like very ill. I have a naturally muscular body always. Even there was a picture I remember from when I was a little kid on a swing set with my arms like this, you know, like holding the swing set ropes. Still like delts and biceps. I wasn't even doing sports. That's just my body. My mom told me 10 push-ups and she never lifted weights. Like, that's, you know, that's just like my genes, you know? So we have this kind of idea maybe that gets developed when we're teenagers or something, that like somehow I'm going to one day be skinny, and that this cookie that I'm eating today, or like my missed workout, that's why I'm not, you know, all of these little things. But it's really like, let's be reasonable about what our body actually is. Like, what does our family look like? What's reasonable, again, for our lifestyle? You know, of course, Instagram is full of people who've dramatically changed their bodies, dramatically. They also spend almost like a side job doing that.
Which is my other favorite cadence is that about like that being a hobby.
Yeah.
Or how do you phrase it? It's just like body modification like is a hobby. The same thing as any other kind of hobby that you invest time and resources and, you know, like dedicate to.
The six pack with everything defined, that's body modification. That's like it's like a kink that they're interested in. It's the same as someone whose face is covered in piercings, who has tattoos head to toe. Like, you know, there are plenty of people out there who are really invested in kind of the appearance of their body as this, like a hobby, as like a fetish almost. And I would really I don't think bodybuilders would disagree with me about, like, they're so interested in how can I morph my body? Can I get really big? Can I lose all my body fat? Can I I follow a guy who regularly posts when he was just this like enormous like superhero body, and now he's still like super muscular, but he's like, I don't train like that anymore. I'm not competing anymore. It's like not my interest. I'm like a dad now. And he like regularly, like, it was a hobby. Like, he's just like, I don't have the time to do that anymore. Like, that's like I'm restoring a car in the driveway. Like, it's like I'm still interested in my body and like what it can do and looking in a certain way. But I don't have the time. Like, you know, he's like, I'm in a relationship. Like, my life has more stuff going on than when I was like, rrr.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's the difference between thinking about it that way versus thinking about it as a like, well, if only the stars aligned and all these factors kind of like lined up, then this would happen. This kind of body would happen. And it's like, no.
Yeah. If only you sign up for the Instagram ad FODMAP thing, in a year you would be like tiny Christina. Like, no, literally not true. I always am shocked how tall you are. Like, you're, you know, it's just not gonna happen.
Oh man, I saved, speaking of that, and then I will speak of it no more, I saved that low FODMAP SpawnCon ad, just for the purposes of referring to it for this conversation, which I immediately regretted, because now, guess what I'm getting is just only other versions of that ad. Yeah. Which I'm sure will continue on through the new year. But what can I say? I'm only human. Well, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of a lovely place to wrap our thoughts for this part 1, and we will be doing a part 2 at the beginning of well, this is coming out at the beginning of January. We're going to do another one that comes out at the beginning of February, where we'll again be soliciting questions on the topic of, I think we decided that was going to be around sort of building sustainability and this idea of like, okay, like it's the end of January and like whatever thing you decided you were going to do, like the low FODMAP meal plan delivery system, like got boring within 2 weeks. Shocker. Now what? And so I'm really looking forward to, I see that as a conversation around, okay, like we know the don'ts column. How do we start filling the do's column?
Yeah, exactly. Very cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy New Year. This is technically the last day of 2024, though you'll be seeing it in 2025.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was Busybody Podcast. I'm the founder and owner of Brooklyn Strength Studios. You can find me on Instagram at Brooklyn Strength. You can find out more about my offerings on my website, brooklynstrength.com. I hope you'll subscribe to my Substack after class. All's in the show notes. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Please share with your friends so that more people listen to this podcast. I love these conversations, and I hope more people can hear them. My music is by Rob Byrne, performed by the Wild Yaks. My podcast is produced by Brad at Soundtrain Studios, and my illustrations are by Jackie Mendez and Azul Trejo, and edited by myself. Thank you so much.